don't know.
No, he doesn't know. Sam Bennett and Chunk in two cuts with a little interruption from a preview of something we're going to hear soon. And my guest has arrived here. We are WPKN in Bridgeport, 89.5 FM, serving Fairfield, New Haven, and Litchfield counties in Connecticut and Suffolk County in New York, as well as communities around the world via our podcasts and streaming live, and also on the archives at WPKN.org. So I hope you'll join us in any way you can, after the fact, live, or even before, which is a feat in itself. Brings us to a little after 2 o'clock on this early January in 2018. And my guest, Roger Kaufman, is here. Let's see if his microphone works too. Roger?
Greetings, Richard.
Okay. If you can just be a little closer to that in general, you'll come out a little better here. So Roger and I have known each other for a long, long time. Actually, we knew each other from school in Westport years ago. We both have some vintage behind us here.
Don't we?
Yeah, I think you were you in the Triumvirate? No.
I was not.
You weren't. Okay. The
Orphenians, yes.
Yes, Orphenians. Yeah, the Triumvirate, great group that was a folk music group, I think, inspired by the Kingston Trio and some such things. I'm sure there are a lot of listeners who need to be educated about the Kingston Trio, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. Currently, you are leading a live group of musicians around this part of Fairfield County in a thing called Old School Music, right?
Well, the band is called Old School Review.
Old School Review, yeah.
Right. Yep.
Okay. And you're performing at a couple of locations. I know 323 is one of them, and the others are?
We're working at the Heights restaurant called Brother Vic's down in South Salem a lot. That's a new live music venue in the shrinking world of live music venues with an actual stage and sound man and PA system built for music. So we're excited about that kind of place going on. And looking forward to the reopening of the Reading Roadhouse and the Levitt Pavilion, and we'll be at a place called the Falcon up in Marlborough, New York. And
where's Marlborough, New York?
It's out toward past Brewster on 84. And it's a fabulous throwback to, I would say, the combination of the Las Vegas showroom and a beatnik supper club by some fabulous Tony Falco guy who's charges nothing at the door but has a milk can in the front and says, "Put in what you'd like for the musicians."
Yeah, that's an old-fashioned way of doing it, isn't it? You know,
yeah,
instead of the open case or the hat that's passed.
Yeah. So in the scarcity of live music venues and things like that are accessible, these are the kinds of places that Fairfield Theater and the Warehouse and so forth. But we're producing shows and playing shows and the like, so we're keeping.
Well, hopefully, if you provide the honey, they'll provide the milk. So that's great. But there's something else going on in your life that is really interesting now. I knew you from other parts of your life, but I was at the Levitt Pavilion last summer when you got together with, I think it was Vince Giordano, wasn't it? Was it Vince or another group that performed that evening?
No, actually, it was just us that evening.
Oh, just you. Okay.
But Vince is a friend.
Okay. But I was talking about your, not old school music now, but the music of your relative.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, your relative who is I believe it was your grandfather, right?
Correct.
Okay. And Mel B. Kaufman, there we are. Kaufman with one N, because you have to look that up carefully. And he was a ragtime composer, wasn't he?
He was. He was somewhat of an unknown ragtime composer in relation to the household names of ragtime, such as George M. Cohan and John Philip Sousa before them, and then others that Irving Berlin's period. But as I found out about him, he had a prolific body of music and was very inventive and had a fantastic number of songs that he invented the one-step, which was a version of the two-step when people started to move in funny directions after march music. This was the bridge to jazz, what's called ragtime.
So now was a two-step a march really then?
Not really.
No,
it was a little bit different. The Philip Sousa era of marches and written music, where everything was written, began to change around 1910, 15, when things, people started expressing themselves musically and went off the chart and played something that they felt rather than what somebody else said they should play.
Well, things like ragtime and wasn't quite swing then. It was more just the very, very early jazz, really.
It was. But there were some inventive ones that went off of that and created movement of people. What John Philip Sousa said, that there was a strange sensation that came over you where you felt like dancing, that kind of thing. And it was syncopation that was the additional element in there. And then a break where riffing started, and such things as a solo occurred where someone made an expressive statement that wasn't charted.
Just a free solo, sort of like the cadenzas in classical music, where someone could just go and do whatever they wanted and come back to the original melody.
Yeah, it's called open solo on the chart, where it just says do your own thing, take 4 bars or 16 or whatever.
But the real revolution was also that the common people, the common man, could first acquire the sheet music, which was a big thing, and then a couple of years later, when recordings came about, could then actually listen to it also.
Right, so the ability for composers, like my grandfather and everyone else, who wanted their music published and sold, were dependent upon the sale of the sheet music. There was no, it was pre-player piano, and then player piano rolls, and finally vinyl. But if the sheet music didn't look good, it didn't capture people's attention unless you were already box office. So
you mean the cover?
The covers.
The covers.
The artwork.
Which are now, you go to flea markets or tag sales, and sometimes they put them up on the wall, all framed and all, or you can find stacks and stacks of this great stuff that had been sort of lost in a lot of ways. It got sidetracked when music changed completely to all recordings and all.
Well, it went the way of vinyl and 8-track and cassette and all these things that CD and MP3 and streaming, have made obsolete. But my whole premise in the old school music production part of my life is there is a future in the past, and there is much valuable, substantial cultural importance, even in American history, important of things that have preceded where we are and that created what we now know as jazz and blues and rock and roll and rhythm and blues.
And all that is inherently American, really.
Exactly.
In at least the introduction, it got adopted by a lot of other cultures and all, but we're still the birthplace of all that, aren't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's part of the special nature of the American culture. And it's actually what the Smithsonian Museum is all about, is preserving history, whether it be military or cultural or performing arts or drama or Judy Garland's slippers or whatever it is. It's the preservation of history. So I think the iconic nature and importance of the musical forms like ragtime and jazz and blues and swing and so forth, are truly ours. And nobody with a little button that's a little smaller than somebody else's button somewhere else had anything to do with. I mean, witness the importance of James Dean, Elvis Presley, and Marilyn Monroe all over the world, and things like that. It's American culture.
Well, I mean, even currently, hip hop. If you tune into some stations other than what us nice white people listen to, Caucasians, shall we say, or even American blacks, you go to Brazil and you'll hear hip hop in Brazil. Go to France and you hear Algerian and French hip hop, and Israel and so it's those influences that have made America one of the great exporters of current culture. And so, here we were in ragtime. I don't know if ragtime is something that ever caught on, because we didn't have the recordings and we didn't have the media that we have today. It took a while to get out of here, the ragtime and early jazz. I would say until the time in the 20s in Paris when jazz started to take off.
I practically vanished into extinction were it not for the Sting and the movie where Scott Joplin's music was revived and became notorious, and the body of music that he created. I don't know that people would know what ragtime is or was. That movie really did a lot for what ragtime represented. I'm
trying to think of his name. Joshua, somebody put out an album of ragtime, and it was actually billed as a classical LP, the complete works of Scott Joplin. That came out a little bit prior to that movie, and was actually the sort of opener for it at all. I have it at home, a couple of his albums from that time, and it was new to me when I listened to it in probably the late 60s, early 70s, something like that. So Grandpa Mel here, Mel B. Kaufman here, that's what it was. It was the Peacherine Ragtime Society Orchestra that came and played that in Westport at the Levitt Pavilion.
Oh, okay.
Right. I remember. And I had gotten some pre-performance publicity about it, but I didn't realize that you were really involved so intimately because of the Mel Kaufman connection. Let's listen to one of the pieces. Do you have a particular favorite or a couple of favorites on this?
Well, I do, but the best known song of his is one that many people recognize from their childhood, from Tom and Jerry cartoons and Warner Brothers and things. His work is behind about 250 silent films, and but by far the Meow record about cats became a music standard in the film business. So perhaps Meow, there's a vocal and piano version of that.
Oh, good.
So maybe
let's put both of them on here.
You can hear.
Just change this mode here, and here is the very catty Meow song.
And blue, she wanted some kind of pet. All day she cried until he sighed. I'll search around the city till I find a kitty. So he brought one home just to see if it would be company. They made him a bed out in the shed. Happily good night then was said. But all night long Angora sang his song. Meow, meow. He gave a cabaret, but just one tune he'd play. Meow, somehow life he's longing for company changed while he sang on merrily. That ever taunting growl, that ever haunting howl. Meow, meow. next day they gave him away. But every time he came back, a thing or two Angora knew. Each night upon the railing you would hear him wailing. All the neighbors were kept awake, so they took him to the lake. Twice they had him drowned. Next day no sound. Then they went to bed all around. But all night long Angora sang his song. Meow, meow. He gave a cabaret, but just one tune he played. Meow, somehow. Folks say death and taxes are sure, but Angora's song will endure. When Angel Gabriel blows, you'll hear that cat of Joe's. Meow, meow.
So that was Mel Kaufman, and played by the Peacherine Ragtime Society Orchestra. I love the addition of the glockenspiel bells to it. It just makes it sparkle at the end, doesn't it?
Yep. The percussion ideas and the instrumentation and ornamentation of that music of the period is unmatched and wonderfully recreated authentically using the original charts that this young band leader, Andrew Green, found all over the world and reorchestrated note for note of all of Kaufman's music. Some unknown and never recorded before, and others, that had been recorded.
I also remember that period was the beginning of using percussion in a little more interesting way. I think it came out of the musical theater, really, and, it was the time of vaudeville, too.
Sure.
And that little cymbal that doesn't really ring, splash, tinny little thing, Actually, I'm playing some music in a band right now where the directions say, slap your tongue on this note. And, you're supposed to play, boom, really, really hard. But that's sort of what it's like. So Mel Kaufman, who died in 1932, was it something like that?
Yes.
And you You never got to know him then?
Never met him. No.
Right. Just a heritage. So one day somebody will be talking about you in the same way.
Dream on, brother.
Right. I'm Richard Epstein on WPKN talking with Roger Kaufman, not Mel B. Kaufman here. So, this is sort of one period in music that starts American music, but there are a lot more branches that lead to the music that we know today as popular music. And you've been involved in a bunch of them in many ways, haven't you?
I have. I was fortunate to have a family with musical roots. Not my grandmother, but my mother was a very interesting character and influence on a lot of people. She, in fact, produced the performing arts series for the town of Westport in 1960-61 at the high school that included people like Sir John Gielgud and the Weavers and Michael McLemore and Odetta and Andre Segovia, as well as Hal Holbrook and Mark Twain Tonight. And she came from a New York background, was a ballsy and piss and vinegar lady who took names and told you where it was at. And she loved to hang around in blues and jazz joints, and her friends were people like John Hammond and Barney Josephson, who started the club in the village called Cafe Society.
Oh, okay.
So she was monkeying around with the music of Paul Robeson and Meade Lux Lewis and Joe Turner and Pete Johnson, Albert Ammons in the 40s. Mm-hmm. So I was a kid in Weston listening to Ray Charles and Mahalia Jackson and Paul Robeson and Boogie Woogie when Bill Haley and the Comets and other folks were taking Boogie Woogie rhythms and putting electric guitars on them and doing things called rock and roll.
So that whole period of early gospel blues and stuff, it was interesting because it was sort of subterranean, especially in the village, but below people's radar until maybe the 50s or 60s, when field recordings of this stuff started to be released by people like the Smithsonian Records, like the Nonesuch Records and all. I remember as a kid collecting some, multi-LP sets that purported to give, the real recordings of blues and Lead Belly and people like that, who were releasing records in small quantities down south and some other places in the late 20s, 30s, right? But, it was still not
under the radar.
It really was.
It was called race music then.
Yeah, it was.
And it was called race music.
I could see
it was
that.
not played on white radio stations because it was not de rigueur, and it was intentionally kept away, like Jackie Robinson's preceding, black ball players were, because this country has a history of racism and segregation that only changed in the 60s, and I'm not sure where it's going now.
Well, even then, into the 70s and 80s, I know a lot of the groups that were primarily black talked about traveling around and, the clubs treating them as second-class citizens and not being able to stay in the same hotels and, being paid less and all. And so now you have a really tight involvement with that now, don't you? Another venture.
I do, and as I mentioned, I grew up with this, in my DNA, and have been a passionate and consistent supporter and performer of rhythm and blues music my entire life. The oddity of the whole thing is, in the early '60s, I was listening to the Stax Records. People after doo-wop and, some rock and roll things that I liked. Lloyd Price a great deal and Howard Tate and people like that. But it captured my interest when I heard Green Onions and things like that coming out of Memphis in the early 60s. And the irony is that through my relationship with with my grandfather's music, I met this young band leader who was from Annapolis, and he was interning at the Smithsonian. And through his work at the Smithsonian, they learned about my work with the Blues Brothers band up in New York and Chicago and so forth. And that's how I got involved with the preservation of American music at the Smithsonian. Their chief interest was about 1960s music, where for the first time, you had black and white rhythm sections working together for the music and nobody paying attention to anybody's color. And so I was asked, if I would be interested in helping, locate some of these people and see if they were interested in working with the Smithsonian, where they preserve American history. And when they expressed it in this manner about a transracial cooperation, I waited about 8 seconds and said, I'm in. And so it's a 3-year project now, and been a very, very satisfying and exciting development that I never saw coming, and I don't think it has an ending to it, because music and history are intertwined and forever shall be.
Well, and not only the history of it, but the fact that there's so many recordings out now and so many people that maybe have heard something but don't really understand the background. I know that my wife and I took a trip to Nashville and Memphis last year. Something I've been meaning to do for a while. I'm not terribly well schooled in that. I know a lot about a lot of types of music, but it was an eye-opener for me to go to the Music Writers Hall of Fame or the rock and roll
country music,
right, and to the Stax Studios and places like that, and actually feel what it was like to be in that little 20 by 20 room, with you and a microphone and a small window and a booth, and producing some of the most iconic music that we listen to today, and that's inspired so much. So this project is really going to expand that, isn't it?
Well, it certainly will. It's the Smithsonian is a collection of 14 different museums in Washington, of which one is called the Museum of American History. And they have been involved in amassing collections of roots blues and jazz as the premier art forms of American music for a long, long time. But they are openly remiss in their absence of anything to do with what they call modern music after 1950. So the Memphis project that I was involved in and continue to be was the start of a modern music effort, and then they had a changing the guard there, and they have a new curator who has been given carte blanche to continue to expand their collections of things, because they are only able to exhibit product and artifacts and instruments and things that are in their collections. So there's a process involved in that whole thing that is interesting and been exciting to be able to help them out in that regard.
But of course, maybe this will inspire, once word gets out more, maybe this will inspire more people to actually donate to those collections, because there's a lot of stuff out there in attics or in living rooms or in basements now that maybe people don't understand are of amazing historical and musical value, So it'd be a great thing.
I have 400 or 500 albums in my attic myself. And I treasure them. And of course, my kids say, what are you doing with those? And I said, well, one day they could be yours. And they say, no thanks, Pop,
Well,
but that's okay.
It's okay. Those of us who love music and grew up with that other style of recording and storage, have a different idea.
While we're on the record subject, if I may segue for a second, because the experience I had in working with Steve Cropper in Memphis and in Nashville, where he lives now, and the whole archiving and learning the history of Stax Records ties into the passing of a Westport iconic figure named Sally White.
Oh, yeah.
Whose record store and record love and love for music touched so many people. She passed at 86 or 87 years of age about 10 days ago. And I wanted to mention the importance of what she has done for people like myself and thousands of others, young and old, in the world of jazz and blues and rock and soul and all. She felt very strongly that the passion and conveyed the passion for music to so many people in the area, and was friends with the Brubecks and the Mulligans and the Hank Joneses and the Chet Bakers and Don Elliots and Mahegans of the world that touched a lot of people. And
sure.
The reason I'm speaking about her in this context is twofold. One is Old School Music is helping to put on a commemorative and celebratory gathering in her honor. And I'm working with my friend Brian White. Hi, Brian, who is Sally's son, to pull together many of the musicians whose lives were touched by her. And we are hoping that we will have the support of WPKN, which I know you were involved prior with her and knew her well.
Yeah.
Because
since I was a kid.
The day of the record store is in the rearview mirror, and I learned, a lot about Stax Records, that Stax actually started as a record store called Satellite Records, adjacent to an old movie theater.
Yeah.
And the goings-on and camaraderie and the warmth and love of music that was in that record store was like Cutler's in New Haven, or the Record Hunter, or Melody House, or Klein's in Westport, or Sally's Place. And it was a piece of American musical culture that will never be repeated again. And it had to do in Memphis with black and white folk in the record store. Steve Cropper swept the floor in the theater and then worked in the record shop called Satellite Records as a teenager. Mm-hmm. It's where he met Booker T. Jones.
And by the way, we just heard that Green Onion that you talked about under us, Booker T. and the MGs.
And so when they started the record label, it was first called Satellite Records because of the record store.
Right.
And then Estelle Axton and Stewart, her brother, started a record label to record country music artists. And then black folk came into the record store and started listening to blues and gospel and other things. And they decided, when Booker T was around, let's cut some other things, and whoever wants to play, plays. And so it was the synthesis and an incubation tank for transracial cooperation that turned into Stax Records. So God bless you, Sally White, and other record store owners for providing the chemistry for people to talk and hang out and compare notes and enjoy music together in a record store.
Well, these days, I remember you asked me what I remembered Sally White's most often quote to me was, and I said, well, I'd walk in the store, she'd wave me over and say, you gotta listen to this, right? And she knew my tastes were wide-ranging, and yet she opened my ears to so many different things. Now, it's done by things like Spotify and mechanical formulae that analyze what you've listened to and hopefully are as open, I shouldn't say minded, but, logistically open to expose you to that. But that personal touch, it's so rare now, really, really rare now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the ability to sell records and songs, I have to thank my grandfather, since you're on the subject of, you got to listen to this, because my grandfather wrote the song called Listen to This.
Oh, yeah.
And it's in the liner notes of that jacket there. If you flip through there, you'll see a piece of sheet music.
Oh, here, listen to this.
You could even play it because it's...
Let's do that.
Why not? Well, the backstory on this is too good to be true.
Yeah, let's listen to this while we
what
talk.
he did is he had a publisher in Cleveland at some point, and he wrote this song and sent it to him with a note that said, Sam Fox, Mr. Fox, I can't wait till you listen to this. And the name of the song is Listen to This.
And it's not loading up so easily, so let's try this again. Now, that Sam Fox was not the Fox from 20th Century Fox, was he?
No, I don't believe so, but... foxes are a big family, so I'm sure somewhere.
There's Foxy Lady, there's all sorts
That's right.
of things. Let's see. I believe this should be it.
Listen to this. You find it here?
I'll get there.
It should be there. Can't be unhappy when you hear that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, when I look at the liner notes here, maybe I was right. Listen to this, written 1916, and it was on Fox Movie Tone News in 1928, Fox Movie Tone News Volume 2, and so, it may very well have been the Fox of the Fox record or Fox movie stuff. I don't know, but
could have been.
I have to ask Roger Ailes. So let's see. So we've got that. I'd love to play one or two cuts from this album here with Steve Cropper. I mean, I looked down the list. Just read some of these. Soul Man by Sam and Dave, In the Midnight Hour by Wilson Pickett, Mr. Pitiful, Otis Redding, I don't know that, The Happy Song, Dum Dum by Otis Redding, Suki Suki, Don Covey. He wrote that or he played on that?
He wrote that with Don
Steve
Covey.
Cropper?
Yeah.
Wow.
These are all songs written by Steve.
Wow, Cruisin', Booker T and the MGs, Hip Hugger, also by Booker T, and 99 and One Half, Won't Do, by Wilson Pickett. And so let's listen to something. Your choice.
My choice.
Yeah.
Gee, that's a tough one. Everyone knows Soul Man and everyone knows Dock of the Bay.
Let's listen to something little more obscure, maybe.
Very few people knew that he was co-writer of three of the greatest rhythm and blues hits of all time. One with Wilson Pickett called The Midnight Hour. One with Eddie Floyd called Knock on Wood. And the other, of course, Otis Redding's Dock of the Bay, which, according to BMI, is the sixth biggest number of plays at the time, 11.5 million plays. At the donation ceremony that we did, the Songwriter Hall of Fame people, the Grammy people, BMI people were jumping up and down because Cropper sang the vocal on it.
Well, this is an Eddie Floyd tune. I don't know.
Yeah. It's actually one of my passwords.
Don't tell what it's for.
Good choice. Good choice.
6345789. What's my number? 6345789. And if you need a little hugging, call on me. That's all you got to do now. And if you want some kissing, call on me, baby. All right. No more lonely nights. Will you be alone? All you got to do is pick up your telephone and dial 6345789. That's my number.
Not there? Next time.
I'll be right there just as soon as I can. And if I be a little bit late now, I hope that you'll understand. Oh, yeah. All right. And if you need a little loving, call on me. Lord have mercy. And if you want some kissing, call on me, baby. That's all you got to do now. No more lonely nights. Will you be alone? All you got to do is pick up your telephone and dial 6345789. That's my number. 6345789. Call me on the telephone. 6345789. What's my number? 6345789. That's my number, Jim.
The Day of the Fade on that, yeah. So if you'd been following very closely and you know any intimate things about Roger, you know that's a password to something or other now. So don't steal anything, please. So Roger, it's been really great. I mean, there's so much to talk about with what's going on with you and your various projects. So I'm sure we'll get together again up here, and I especially look forward to working on the Sally White memorial.
Good.
You know, she was a huge inspiration in my personal life of music and appreciation. And as a matter of fact, I produced a gold record, not anything particular on it, but just a gold record that so she could put it up in her store. Which she did for years, just in honor of Sally White, when the Westport Arts Center held a sort of little tribute to her before she retired. You know, because we heard the store was closing. So
Yeah.
now she's closed, and it's really too bad. But you know, we're ready for other influences. That's it. You know, there's always something to know, to learn.
There is, and much as there's a future in the past, we certainly hope there's a bright future in the future as well.
That would be good.
I will share with you one little hopeful piece of information, and that is that next time that we're sitting here together, I hope to be able to tell you something significant about a neighbor of ours who is a special musician, an interesting guy in Weston named Jose Feliciano. At this moment in time, you know, we are hopeful that we will have some great news that we can share about preserving his work forever for American history, because he deserves it.
Well, that would be really great. Jose's been one of the greats of music here in the U.S., even though he's not originally from here, is he? So, anyway, I'm Richard Epstein. This show is Sometimes Classical. I've been speaking for the last 45 minutes with Roger Kaufman, who's from Westport, Connecticut, from whence I also spring. And stay tuned for all his projects. Go listen to old school music if you see them publicized somewhere. And do go back and listen to all the music you never thought you'd like.
Friday night, actually, since you asked.
We'll
be local at the
okay.
At the Heights called Brother Vic's in South Salem, New York.
All right.
Fabulous new venue. We'll be there Friday night at 8 o'clock.
I haven't seen it myself, but I'm going to check it out.
They're out there. There are some good places left. Thank you very much, Richard.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
You're welcome. We're WPKN of Bridgeport 89.5 FM and WPKN.org.